My topics are Administrative Guidance 11 and a Vapour policy update. And as I we kind of tabled this topic, and of course, yesterday when I was actually doing the presentation, I started thinking, well, why do I want to talk about AG 11? And so, welcome to year 2 AD, after Dave, right? So, it's been about a year and a half since we've been working under the CSAP detailed screening procedures. And from my perspective as a statutory decision maker signing certificates predominantly, I think we've seen some real improvement in some areas, in particular with respect to consistency between summary site conditions and draft instruments, presence of required pre-approvals, for example. I think that the quality of the documentation that's landing on my desk is being greatly enhanced by this screening procedure. And so my thanks to all the detailed screeners, but there's still work to be done. So there you go. So I've listed a few areas here that I want to talk about today. The first one is communication with affected parties. And I know that this is a topic that is not easy, right, for any of us to tackle. So I just wanted to recognize that on the outset. That I'm not here with I didn't bring my machine gun to a night fight or something like that. These are just topics for discussion. And then things like adequate detail in summary site conditions, and some basic fact checking, things like accurate proper descriptions, meets and bounds, and general QA/QC. So I'll start out with the communication requirements. It's been about 3 years, I guess, since AG 11. So we've been working with it for a while. And AG 11 is now referenced in Procedure 12, which is the procedure for crafting legal instruments. And so as of December 2015. And so why communicate? And there's a lot of good reasons to communicate. I've listed a few up here to determine if investigations are adequate on affected parcels, and also to verify the assumptions of the future land use as well as the assumptions that have been employed in risk assessment and ensuring the validity of them, and also to ensure that if there's going to be use restrictions or risk management on affected parcels, that those items are both appropriate and achievable. But from where I sit as the decision maker, ultimately, there's another very good reason to communicate, and that is because I have a statutory obligation to communicate, right? And this isn't an obligation that's laid out in EMA or CSR. This is an obligation that is laid out over a century of administrative law. And so you'll see the terms. Sorry. That's what I'm looking for. You see the terms administrative fairness, due process, and natural justice bandied about. And this is, as a decision maker, I have a duty to ensure that any party that may be materially affected by my decision has been consulted and has been provided with an adequate opportunity to provide comment, which I would then consider in my decision. And given the technical nature of the work we do, that's why Appendix 2 of AG 11 is so long. We need to provide them with a whole bunch of information, and then, of course, provide them with a whole bunch of time to either review that information themselves or to more likely, hire somebody who can review that information for them. Sorry, this is pretty loud. Is that okay for everyone? All right. And so I think I've said that. I've also thrown up some expectations for responsible parties. So this is in the Notice of Offsite Migration fact sheet and our response letter when we get NOMs. And that's the expectation here is that contamination that is migrated onto someone else's property, the RP is going to investigate and delineate that contamination fully and plan and implement a remediation of that contamination. And, from our perspective, we strongly encourage RPs to start that communication process early with the affected parties. And therefore, when you're in the planning stages of that remediation, we can ensure that the remediation that is ultimately contemplated is mutually satisfactory for both parties. So some of the key issues that I see with communication plan, often there's a couple of, for almost all risk-based certificates these days, it seems there's a couple of use restrictions at the end of the assessment. The first one is don't drink the water. And landowners are pretty comfortable with this land use restriction, particularly in areas where there's municipal supply. They weren't drinking the water anyway. they don't see it materially affecting their land, or their value of their land, or their ability to redevelop. But the big one, of course, is slab-on-grade construction or some other depth restriction. And as you can imagine, if you owned a property and somebody came and said, I've got this great certificate for you, but except, you can't put a basement in or you couldn't put a park gate in, I imagine as property owners we would all feel like, oh, hey, I don't like that provision of the certificate. And sometimes there's really good reasons for this, right? Like often we'll have, in lots of areas of the province, we'll have shallow groundwater, and it's difficult or impossible to evaluate that vapor scenario before the development's actually contemplated. But sometimes, the only restriction, or the only reason that restriction might exist is a limitation of the initial investigation. So the wells that are closest to that off-site affected property are shallow. And no deeper wells were contemplated, even though deeper wells could have been installed. And so what I've seen is on some, and maybe not the majority, but at least on some of these instruments that have come across my desk, there may be restrictions that are unnecessarily strict. And so I just want to make everyone aware of that. And this may, of course, it costs more money to put in a deeper well, but there's a potential savings there in respect to how smooth this package may flow through the communications piece. And then the next one, and which is a big one too, is the format that the communications packages are coming in. And it's really soup to nuts. So you guys are all professionals and you understand that AG 11 is not protocol and not legislation, it's guidance. However, this is guidance related to an obligation and a duty that the director has. And so at the end of the day, the person who's signing off on that legal instrument has to have confidence that this duty has been discharged appropriately. And one of the things is, it seems like we'll get a communication package and maybe there's 3 or 4 off-site affected parcels. All of the documentation is somewhat mixed together and was kind of dropped on the scanner and run through. And now you've got a 100-page document with no kind of table of contents or no places for detailed screeners or the ministry to reference exactly where that communication is, and it takes a lot of time to review. And even if it's all there, it's a big piece of work to actually confirm that it's all there. And so actually CSAP has created a new template for communication packages. I think it just got uploaded to the website last week. And I would invite you guys to look at it and determine if you think it can be improved. Obviously, get that feedback back to CSAP, and I've been participating in that process as well. So I'd be happy to participate. But I think that if we could get these things in a bit more standard format, it would really facilitate that screening process with respect to the communications, and so the detailed screening will happen quicker, and then hopefully there'll be quicker turnaround times from the decision maker as well. So that's that. Another key issue that we wanted to raise was amendments. So we've been getting, in the last couple of years, at least since I've been delegated for signing these documents, we get a lot of requests for amendments. It's not uncommon to find errors in legal instruments shortly after issuance. And one thing that's been particularly problematic is errors in metes and bounds descriptions. And I can only imagine that, seeing as these have gone through multiple layers of review, that maybe that's happening as part of a property transaction, or when the transaction ultimately takes place at land title office, some lawyer with the land title or the purchaser identifies, oh, this metes and bounds is not quite accurate. And that's one type of amendment request we get, and then there's lots of others too, amendments to turn off the monitoring requirements. So in Schedule B, we've got, monitoring will occur as per the PVP or until a successful application can be made to the director or a satisfactory request can be made to stop monitoring. And given the workload, we actually asked CSAP for some help in determining, okay, does CSAP have a role in helping us adjudicate these amendments? And so we're currently collaborating on an approach to develop how we're going to handle various types of amendments. Right now, the general rule of thumb is if it's a mistake that was made by MOE, we'll fix it. and we'll reissue that instrument. If it's a mistake that came to MOE and was made before we got it, please submit a service application, and we're going to be billing hourly. But under this new approach that we're contemplating with CSAP, there's going to be categories of different types of amendments and actually a fee structure associated with each of those, so flat fee. But I don't know when that'll be ready. We're still in the development stages. Another thing I wanted to discuss today was Vapour documents. So it's tough for me to stand up here and talk about updates to the Vapour documents because we haven't had any success really in bringing these things forward in the last couple of years. So it would have been in the summer of 2014 when some of you would have seen stuff like this when I was a risk assessment officer for MOE and taking on updating these documents. It's still our plan to take TG4 and split them into a protocol and an updated technical guidance. The protocol will house the vapor attenuation factors, which is entirely appropriate since they form the basis of numerical vapor assessment. And then there'll be an updated TG4 document. And early this year or late last year, Peter Reid approached me from the technical review committee and said, hey, looks like you guys are having a lot of trouble with this. Would me coming up with some funds to let a contract for CSAP help be helpful? And I fell down the stairs graciously accepting the offer. So there is a contract that's been let to a couple of CSAPers to help us hopefully bring these documents to the finish line sooner. They're working on it. I'm hoping that the documentation can be finalized kind of summer. I'm thinking late summer, early fall this year. Get the documents up for comment and posting, and then actually get them into force. And there's a few key areas that maybe you've all heard this message before, but there's relief coming, particularly for the parkade scenario. Omnibus is going to form part of this, so you get, as Glenn mentioned this morning, parkades have always been evaluated on the surface use of the site. So generally speaking, for parkade sites, those are either residential standards applying in the parkade or commercial, if it's commercial at grade. Now it's going to be a parkade standard, which will give you some relief there. But then there's also, we're looking at incorporating the attenuation factor adjustment from the high-density residential land use derivation protocol. And keeping in mind that that's an engineered control. However, we're going to be cutting up risk management. Right now, a parkade venting system, an HVAC system, is treated the exact same as, on a low-risk vapor intrusion site for a parkade as, a sub-slab depressurization system on the old chemical factory site where you absolutely need to cut off and manage that pathway. And so we're looking at teasing out tiers of risk management. There are sites where risk management is paramount for vapor intrusion, and there are sites where you've got some minor exceedances underneath a parkade slab, and if the city enforces implementation of HVAC, which they're going to in their building code, this is never going to be an issue. And so we're going to separate out how those two are treated. There's the attenuation factor, so that attenuation factor adjustments for parkades, and then relaxation of precluding factors specifically for parkades. And the one I'm referring to, of course, is the preclusion of using any attenuation factor if there's any contact of groundwater with drain tile at any time of year. Another one is to enhance the applicability of the biodegradation adjustment factor for hydrocarbons. This is following US EPA's, I want to say recent, but now I think it's a year and a half old, guidance with respect to handling petroleum hydrocarbon vapor intrusion sites, and also expanding the vapor refinement step beyond gasoline and diesel component substances. And so these are things that the RC sappers are helping us look into. And there's some other things that I'm hopeful will make it into the guidance, but we're still determining on exactly how we can make it work. So that's it for vapors. So stay tuned. Hopefully you'll see something more substantive in the coming months. And that's everything. So, yeah. I don't know. Do you have time for questions? Yes. Okay, we have time for a couple questions if anybody wants to ask one. Jim. Lateral attenuation. See, I specifically avoided talking about that one. That's something, that's something that I've actually talked with our contractors about a little bit, and I was hoping that we could identify some really basic and even quite conservative scenarios that we could employ some lateral attenuation, i.e., and this scenario being you're beyond the boundaries of the soil and groundwater plume, you drill your Vapour well to evaluate the building that's still 10 or 15 meters away, and when you apply the appropriate attenuation factor, you exceed by a factor of 2. And right now, given there's no lateral attenuation, it seems that the option is to step out another 5 meters and drill another hole, when you know that for all intents and purposes, that 5 meters, now you're 5 meters farther away and you're going to pass, and that building's going to pass. And so I tasked them with trying to help me come up with a common sense, conservative way to apply lateral attenuation. They've done some looking in other jurisdictions, and nobody else has it, apparently. One from California. All right, well, I'll talk about that with CSAP contractors later today. But that's something that we're trying to incorporate. Yeah. All right, seeing no more hands, we'll move on. Thanks, everyone.